So good afternoon. Thank you all for coming. My name is Kim Pruitt-Ilg. I'm the Business Development Manager here at Lake Sunapee VNA and Hospice. And I'm introducing today David Linehan, who is one of our outreach liaisons. And he is going to be giving us a presentation today on Hospice 101.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Kim. And as she said, my name is David Linehan. I've been here now for just about a year. I'm part of the outreach team, which again, during the course of my normal day, I'd be out speaking to possibly your loved ones at the hospital and or their caregivers at the hospital. What we're going to talk about in the hospice process really is, number one, what is hospice? Why is it important? And how do you access it? So we're going to try to hit some of those key things. So here we are, Lake Sunapee Region VNA and Hospice. For us, what we find is many people prefer end of life to happen at home. But actually what happens is really only about a quarter of the folks do actually pass at home. And if you think about that for yourselves, what environment do you want to be in when that time comes? Or if it's for your mom, your dad, your grandmother, your grandfather, what would be the ideal scenario for them? And those are the things that we do here at Lake Sunapee Region VNA. We do hospice at home. Now we'll get to a slide later that talks about what is home. Now, what does hospice do? It provides support and care for those in the last phases of life. But we talk about a life-limiting illness. What that really means is someone who has, if their symptoms and disease were not treated, the expectation will be 6 months or less life remaining. Now, as we think about those things, that might be a cancer diagnosis, it might be a kidney problem, it could be a breathing problem, a COPD or a CHF, all these acronyms that you've heard over your time. But what hospice does is we recognize that dying is kind of the last process of living. And we want to honor that. We want to make sure that that patient, that person is treated with the utmost respect. And then again, what really happens is we're focusing on that patient and their family. Because when someone dies, it impacts more than just them. It's their circle, it's their caregivers, it's their kids, and it's their extended family. They might be a huge part of the community. And when that happens, the next thing you know, the community feels that loss. And then lastly, with hospice, one of the other benefits to choosing hospice and or in-home care is that after death support. We will work with families for a year or more to make sure that they're grieving properly and managing the loss. And that's one of the, in my own personal opinion, that's one of the best things that can happen, is because when that person passes, their disease is now gone, but how did it impact those that they left behind? What are the aspects of hospice care? As you can see, it's spelled out on the screen, but technically, it's really patient and family focused. But to me, when you are at the hospital, it's very much about what the doctors and nurses want to have happen for you and to you. When you're doing hospice at home, it's very much about what you and your family want to have happen as you reach end of life. You become the general contractor of your last days, as opposed to the doctor dictating to you what you might need to keep moving forward. There's an interdisciplinary team. That's a big fancy word for saying lots of folks are going to come and make sure and check in on you. And they're going to continue to communicate behind the scenes to make sure that they're treating you, your illness, your anxiety, your pain, and your family's needs across the board. What does that mean? So what is that range of services? Your team will consist of a nurse, often a social worker, to manage some of the community programs that may be available to you or other options. It's not necessary for you to know every possible thing that's available to you as a family or as a patient. So our team will help you understand those things and help guide you through that. The nurse will come out and be your case manager. He or she will be the one that works with you. And again, I'm going to skip around a little bit. Your PCP, you still get to maintain your own primary care physician, and then the hospice medical director to put that plan of care together to manage those symptoms and work towards how you want your end of days to become. You'll have a licensed nurse assistant to come in, work with you maybe on your day-to-day activities of daily living. You'll have someone that can help you and train your loved ones to help you maybe in and out of the bathroom, to and from the kitchen, how to help you get up from a chair if you're at a point in time where you can't move as well as you once did. We also do the medication management. We're going to work with you and your family to make sure that you're taking the meds that are needed. And this is a kind of a gray area, but also not taking the ones you don't need any longer. I can't tell you how many times I've seen in my career someone taking a blood thinner 4 years after their last surgery. And they're only taking it because it was never discharged. We're going to look through those things and make sure that you're taking what's necessary and not taking those things that are kind of superfluous. Volunteers and grief support. So I probably shouldn't say the word COVID, but in these times of COVID, we've had to kind of slow down our volunteer program. But what has been nice is in the past and hopefully moving forward, volunteers will come back into the program, and it might just be someone that sits with you or your loved one so that your caregiver or their caregiver can go out and run the errand that they need to. And it's a very interesting dynamic. Sometimes it works both ways. Those volunteers might have a need within inside themselves to share and be part of the community, and it really works well that they have someone that needs that on the other end. So it can really work both ways. And then the grief support, as I touched on slightly before, what I find there is, and again, it all kind of comes to personal stories of my own, we never know how people are going to grieve. And we never know who it's really going to impact. Sometimes it's the 13-year-old great-granddaughter that had such an amazing relationship with her great-grandfather that it impacts her the most. Where his daughter, his granddaughter, they were all coping fine because they saw it coming. But she doesn't understand why this happened. So the aftercare becomes such a huge, huge part of this. When you think about that, you might have someone that came onto hospice on October 1st, passed away on October 15th, and we're going to keep eyes on the family until the following November. Because what ends up happening is now, right, if somebody passed in the middle of October, what if Thanksgiving was a big get-together and Christmas was a big get-together and they don't know how to cope? We're going to be there to help that family through those times so they can continue to move on and grow and strengthen from what happened. What does that team do? So it seems like we touched on this a little bit earlier, but that plan of care. That nurse will start with a plan of care. It will involve you, the caregiver. It'll involve the patient. We'll circle back with their PCP and get our medical director involved. It's all about technically what happens during the course of a day for this patient. Pain and symptoms, those are the two major things that people are complaining about. And we could probably, one of the symptoms being anxiety. That's what people at end of life are concerned about. Is it going to hurt? And how am I going to feel mentally about it? The team, as you see, attends to the emotional, psychosocial, and spiritual aspects of dying, and with the caregivers. We're really wanting to make sure that the caregivers are well taken care of, as well as the client. Teaching the family how to provide care. We've talked about that again already. It's really interdisciplinary team working together to make sure that you know what's needed and we're helping to teach that. How do we advocate? So if there's something that needs to be said or done for you or your loved one, making sure that we help you with your voice. And then lastly, as we've said, the bereavement care and counseling, making sure that everyone is comfortable with where we are in the process. In its simplest terms, we're going to see a patient about 1 hour per day. But because there's 5 or 6 or 7 team members, you may not see the nurse every day unless the disease requires it. I know there's a patient we're working with right now that we saw her Saturday, Sunday, Monday, because that's where she was and that's what her needs were. Now, once things have settled down, other parts of the team will start to come in. However, hospice is not a 24-hour-a-day service. Oftentimes people hear the word hospice and assume, I don't have to do anything, the hospice team will be here. Well, you have access to us. We have a nurse on call around the clock. If something happens at 3 o'clock in the morning, you have a phone number that you can call, it will be answered, and the needs will be triaged and acted upon. If a nurse needs to go out at 4 o'clock in the morning to make a visit, a nurse will go out at 4 o'clock in the morning to make a visit. And where can we provide care? Very simply, as we talked earlier, if you just take a peek, it's the home, wherever the patient may live, or a loved one's home. So it's not a primary residence per se. Oftentimes you might be staying with a daughter or a son at end of life. In a nursing facility, assisted living facility, hospital, a hospice residence, and then, again, if you think about it, a homeless shelter, a correctional facility, wherever that person resides, we're able to do hospice there. Hospice is generally paid for by insurance. There are very rare cases where something might need to be paid out of pocket. Often things will be paid for your Medicare, or your Medicaid, your PPO, your HMO. How do you qualify for hospice? Right, it's technically a life-limiting disease with a prognosis of 6 months or less. A couple of the outliers are end-stage dementia. None of us have a crystal ball for that. However, we've seen over the years that as people progress in that disease, we can have a trajectory towards end of life and take them onto hospice. If you're going to live longer than 6 months, that doesn't mean that you can't have hospice. You can get recertified, again, if you have a disease that typically would give you a life of 6 months or less. The other part of it is the discontinuation of services. So, if you were somebody with end-stage renal disease, you might, if you're choosing to stop dialysis, you've got now the life-limiting disease and choosing no longer to have treatment, generally speaking, you're going to qualify for hospice. Those that have cancer that choose to no longer do chemo and radiation, generally speaking, you're going to qualify for hospice. And then lastly, it's twofold. It's a benefit, which means that we have to have a physician's order to evaluate and admit, and you have to have a life-limiting illness and choose to no longer receive treatment. So this isn't something that just happens, it's a choice that you and your family make.